Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you very much to AIPM for the opportunity to be able to talk to you today. Firstly, I too would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would also like to pay my respects to those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that have served in the defence of our nation and continue to serve in the defence of our nation. I think AIPM plays a very critical role for me, and the reason why I'm here today is just to recognise that role that AIPM plays, both in the accreditation of project managers, but also the driving of professionalisation and the thinking about best practice and driving that throughout all of the endeavours that we do here in Australia in delivering capability. But particularly important to me in terms of how we drive success in our projects, and I'll talk a bit more about that now. So Defence in 2024-25 spent some $20 billion in acquiring and sustaining capability. I think it's important to note that some 10 to 15 years ago, we were talking about $10 billion, so the budget is changing. The number of projects that we're actually undertaking is very, very significant. The complexity of those programs is very, very significant. We deliver capability in defence. We don't just deliver a tank or an aircraft or a piece of infrastructure, it's capability. We call them fundamental inputs to capability. So thinking about what that means in a project management context is very, very significant. I think that the number of projects that we call ACAT 1, so Acquisition Category 1, have grown substantially. In the 2010 timeframe, we had some 10 projects. We're up over 28 now, ACAT 1 projects. If you look at our ACAT 2 projects, they're very significant in their own right. And combined together, that probably represents in the order of 40% of the projects that we're actually running. So our capacity and the complexity of what we're doing is fundamentally changing. The dollar value of what we're delivering is fundamentally changing. And I think when you look through the characteristics that are described here that are, make up an ACAT 1 program, the one thing that's missing from that slide is stakeholder and stakeholder engagement. And I would like to talk about that a little bit more today. Those stakeholder engagements are critical to the success of programs. And stakeholders in terms of delivering defence capability are vast. It's not just one layer deep, it's multiple layers deep. Looking at the whole of government and thinking about that becomes really important. One point I would note is that I am actually one of the heads of profession with Dr. Liz Devlin for the complex project management job family across government. And I believe that we have to drive this thinking across government in very, very different ways. So what we're doing is complex. What we're doing and our capacity to do it is changing. The way in which we have to do it is going to have to be different into the future. We're going to have to question current paradigms. We must be more agile and more responsive in the way in which we deliver capability into the future. Now in defence, we have a very specific framework for thinking about this, the National Defence Strategy, the Integrated Investment Plan, and the Defence Industry Development Strategy. We have to update this on a 2-year cycle. So we had a Defence Strategic Review in the 2023 timeframe that then gave rise a year later to the National Defence Strategy and the Integrated Investment Plan and a Defence Industry Development Strategy in 2024. And right now, Defence is in the timeframe of replanning for a 2026 National Defence Strategy, Integrated Investment Plan and underpinning industry development strategy. Now, what do these documents do for us? The National Defence Strategy sets the imperative. And as was noted before, things are changing very dramatically. The threat environment in which we're operating is ambiguous and is becoming more contested. That means that we have to respond differently. National Defence Strategy of 2024 talked about being a focus force. What the focus means is, what do we do? Where are we going to fight? And the Indo-Pacific is clearly called out. But it talks about being an integrated force. What does that mean? So integrated is beyond joint. We've talked about joint for many, many years, And we are a small defence force, and we can do joint pretty well. But an integrated force is where it's seamless between what service you're in, what domain in which you're operating. And that creates challenges for the way in which we must program manage these particular outcomes that we're seeking. The National Defence Strategy said that the way in which we're acquiring capability and sustaining capability is not fit for purpose. It is not agile, it's not responsive. We no longer have 10 years warning time. We're going to have to be responding much more rapidly. So the National Defence Strategy sets the scene, sets the context, sets the imperative for doing business differently, responding in a much more agile and responsive way. The Integrated Investment Plan is the body of work that needs to deliver on those National Defence Strategy outcomes. When we did the National Defence Strategy and the Integrated Investment Plan in 2024, we moved from over 600 projects of work to about 276 programs of work. And that's important. Now we're not just thinking about projects, we're thinking about programs of effort. We talk about minimal viable capability. What does that mean? So minimal viable product, if you've been producing software, if you're producing items, means you get to a capability or a product that achieves what you need it to do. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but you can get operational utility out of that. Minimal viable capability in the defence context means that we get something to the field much more rapidly than we've ever done it before. Historically, it would take us 10 years, 8 to 10 years to deliver capability to the field. We have to do that in 2 to 3 years. We have to be able to upgrade those systems in months, not years. So it's a changing paradigm for thinking about that. Historically, we talk about the iron triangle of capability, cost and schedule. In defence, we would always push for the maximum capability within the budget. But that means that schedule gets pushed out. Schedule can't be pushed out anymore. Time is of the essence. So the paradigm is changing to fixing cost, fixing schedule, capability being the dependent variable, and the willingness to take what you can get in the time frame you can get it, making sure that achieves the operational utility that is required by the warfighter, and bringing the fundamental inputs to capability around that can deliver on a warfighting effect is where we have to change the paradigm. We're talking now about continuous capability development and delivery. It goes beyond just thinking about acquisition. It is about where acquisition blurs into sustainment. It is about thinking about how do we set that threshold level, minimal viable capability, and iterate that incrementally over time from that threshold level, minimal viable capability, to an objective level through capability target states. Our paradigm changes from thinking about initial operational capability and full operational capability to capability target states, where we are prepared to approach this in a much more agile and responsive way. And there's some examples that we have in defence, integrated air and missile defence, called Air 6500. We went into contract in the early 24 timeframe. Within 9 months, we delivered the first increment of capability. And by 18 months, in October of this year, we will have the second increment of that capability delivered. It will be operational. It will be capable of being deployed. Previously, when we did integrated air and missile defence and air battle management portion of that, that took us 8 years. We've done it in 18 months. You will expect to see defence delivering these capabilities even faster than we've ever done it before. You may have seen some recent announcements about counter UAS, unmanned aerial systems. When we did this, we had government approval in February. By the middle of this year, we had some $38.7 million with 20 companies delivering counter UAS for our soldiers. We just recently announced going into contract with capability to be delivered at the end of the year for mounted, sitting on vehicles. And we will also have gone to market for counter-UAS for our bases by the end of the year. So from government approval, February of this year to the end of the year, we will be delivering that capability. We have to change the paradigm. So the new lexicon is continuous capability development and delivery, minimal viable capability, agility and responsiveness in the way in which we think about delivering capability. So that has some real changes to the way in which we need to project manage. Now, why have I got the Defence Industry Development Strategy up here and I'm talking to project managers? The key part of this is we have to partner with industry to deliver these outcomes. So the DIDS talks about how we want to grow the industrial base, about strategic partnership and the way in which we work with them. It talks about export, because what we do never gets us to scale. And we have to be able to export capability to get to scale. The ADF's demand signal is not enough. So the industrial base that we need to work with, we have to be interested in that. But unlike other countries' industrial strategies, ours actually has a very important chapter which goes to procurement reform. Now, procurement reform can very easily be thought of in a couple of different ways. It can be thought about in terms of how we change the contracting framework. But that's not enough. We've done a lot of work. When we go to industry now, we've reduced the amount of paperwork by 45%. We've reduced the documents that we seek from industry by 40%. But the real nub of this and the next layer of reform is how we bring together the programmatics of the programs that we're running, the commercial aspects of that, and the technical aspects. So how are we thinking differently? If we're going to reduce the overhead for both defence and for industry in delivering these capabilities, how do we bring those three components together? How do we make sure that we go to market with a contract framework that is agile, that brings together the ability to strategic partner, which now means changing from very transactional contracts to relational contracts. That's the commerciality. But that must facilitate and set up the governance frameworks that allows us to work differently from a programmatic perspective and from a technical perspective. And if we want to respond in 3 years rather than 8 to 10 years, if we want to make sure that we can deliver that framework through continuous capability development and delivery, then we have to think very differently about what we require from a programmatic perspective and from a technical perspective. So harnessing all three of those, so we work differently with industry and we set ourselves up for success, is really fundamental. And that means we have to bring those together under procurement reform. And the way in which we engage with industry has to be very different. I talked before about agile delivery fitting within that, continuous capability, delivery, development and delivery. Different paradigm again from a project management perspective. It's now a program of work rather than discrete stovepipe projects. There is a difference between project management in a stovepipe and program management across the life of a capability, where you start to see sustainment and acquisition now come together in very different ways. The way in which we set a capability up to achieve minimal viable capability and we iterate that over time to take account of emerging threats and new technologies that we need to be able to inject into those capabilities. So this is a new paradigm. It's a new paradigm for how we project and program manage. And it means that we must be able to do that in a very different way. And I want to talk about professionalisation in a second. But it is about how we have confidence in what we're doing as project managers and program managers, and we adopt a risk appetite, because it has to be different if you want to run fast. But it must be disciplined, and more about that in a minute. But this is important. These are fundamental changes to the way in which we've delivered in defence. And I would argue they're fundamental changes for commercial environments as well, where companies want to maintain their competitive edge, do things differently in a much more contemporary way. Under procurement reform, we're looking at digital engineering as being an important part of that, engaging with industry in different ways. Everything from how we manage our schedule, to how we manage our risk, to model-based system engineering, to thinking about digital twins, to making sure they're part and parcel of how we deliver these capabilities. So I challenge you over the next couple of days to think about how we've thought about project and program management and how we must respond in a different way into the future. And what does it mean to be an agile project manager? What does it mean to have confidence in your ability to go after doing things faster? What does it mean for the discipline that you must display in doing that? It doesn't change some of the basics, but it does mean that you must adopt a risk appetite. And similarly, when you're engaging with industry, industry too must adopt that risk appetite. And that means the way in which you engage and build trust and respect becomes really critical. So procurement reform, agile delivery, continuous capability in development and delivery are changing ways in the paradigms that we've been working with in the past. So what do I think is really important? Our performance is our credibility. It also goes to trust and respect. Now in CASG, there is a couple of things that you can always guarantee, is bipartisan support of a view that we don't do well and we don't perform well. Both Labor and Liberals, whether you're in government or in opposition, will always find something to criticise. Now that's because what we do is really, really hard. But there are times when we don't perform well, and understanding where we don't perform well becomes really critical. But it starts with a few basics. It starts with good governance. I talked before about minimal viable capability. We can talk about minimal viable product. We can actually talk about minimal viable process and policy. We should never, ever be talking about minimal viable governance. It doesn't exist. It's either good governance or bad governance. And that goes to the basic discipline of what we must do. I liken this to a child running with a pair of scissors. If you want to run fast, if you think that is the answer to delivering faster, then a child running with scissors will either do three things. It'll either stab the dog, it'll stab themselves, or in the worst case, it could stab the parent. I want people to be running with the scissors in the holster. I don't actually want them to be running. This is a marathon. It's about being out a jog. It is about thinking sometimes slowing down at the start to get the basics and the foundations right becomes really important. Making sure that you've got good governance. Making sure that you understand your reporting obligations and your documentation obligations. Setting projects up for success is the most important step that you make in a project. I will normally talk about 6 steps. The first one is get your strategy right. That must be holistic across the whole of life. You must then align and ensure that your strategy appeals to all your stakeholders. And you must bring them on the journey. They've got to have skin in the game. Getting a good strategy that is executable and having your stakeholders aligned are the fundamental foundations of any good project. The next thing you must achieve is requirement certainty. In a more agile context, it's outcome certainty, where you've got flexibility, where capability can be that dependent variable. And then the fourth key element is getting approach right, making sure that you have an executable approach, that you've thought through all elements, programmatic, commercial and technical, and brought those together in an appropriate way. That makes for an executable business case. If you get that executable business case, you've got that stakeholder alignment, you've built trust and respect, then you'll have your stakeholders there when something goes wrong. And they will give you the resources you need to resolve that problem. And when things go wrong, you'll work together as a team to resolve that because you've built trust and respect. Now, the last one that I wanted to talk about is professionalisation. And we're doing a lot of work in defence, thinking differently about professionalisation. We have recently spent a fair bit of time rejigging how we think about characterising our projects from a complexity context. So we have a new complexity framework. And that framework will now help us understand how to get the right people with the right experience, the right qualifications in the right job. We have now competency matrix so that we can now look at the competencies of project managers to now have the people that we can match to the complexity of the programs that we're undertaking. So that's an important step forward for us. And what that means is that if we combine those two, we look at the right people with the right experience, with the right qualifications for the right roles, that we can now marry those up. We know the competencies, we know the complexity, we can marry the competencies to the complexity. That will give people greater confidence in what they can do and with greater risk appetite if we tie the professionalisation into that, the qualifications. So experience 70, 20, 10. 70% on the job training, 20% about the role that you're in, 10% external. Taking people across the whole of CASG, across the whole of defence, and allowing them to experience different opportunities is where we're going to change some of those paradigms, rather than staying within a division or within a branch for a long period of time. We're going to look at how we retrain for our own work, our internal work, our process and our policy framework. That is effectively the 20%. And then 10% will be how we give people the opportunity to actually change what they do from a Cert 4 all the way to an Executive Masters. So we're going to tie this together in a Defence Learning Academy context. We're going to give people greater opportunity, lifelong learning in their career. My value proposition will be based on values. They underpin everything we do. They are critical to developing trust and respect. We do exciting work in defence. You're never going to experience a broader base of things that are delivering important capability to the ADF. I want people to be empowered, confident in what they do and how they go about doing it, and then making change, driving more agile ways of delivery. And the last part of my value proposition will be professionalising the workforce, both in what we do and how they can have lifelong learning in defence and the work that we do. This is why AIPM is important to me. AIPM and accreditation as a project manager is important. Getting opportunities like this to listen to what is best practice becomes really critical. And thinking about things differently, having the confidence and the ability to take on a risk appetite becomes important. Now, in parallel with this, we're going to do work to reduce our policy and our processes and back that with the right tools. So this is going to be a significant endeavour. Our policy and process must be executable, and it isn't at the moment. Normally, when we get an ANAO audit, our first response is, we'll add more policy. We'll add more process. That's not where we're going to go into the future. We're going to try and dethatch that. And if I combine executable policy process with smart people that are confident and have a risk appetite, that will deliver very different outcomes for me at the end of the day. Now, I think I've talked enough at this point in time. Hopefully, you can see I'm enthusiastic about doing business differently. I believe AIPM plays a very critical role, and I wish you every success over the next couple of days. We have to change some of our paradigms. We have to think differently about how we deliver not just project management, but programs of work. How we can be more agile in our thinking. How we can work with the commercial environment, how we work with the technical environment, how we bring this together differently. And the last thing I want to leave you with is an important thing. Project and program managers are leaders. The values you exhibit in everything you do is really critical. The table stakes for what we do as project managers and program managers is trust and respect. Now, if I reflect on the defence values, we talk about courage. Courage in project management is not the same courage we would expect of someone in uniform on a battlefield. It is the ability to call out bad behaviour. It's the ability to put your hand up when you don't know what you don't know and you've got a problem that you need help with. That's what courage is. We all have service at our heart, and especially in defence. We're delivering capability for the ADF. So that should be a given. Respect, table stakes for what we do every day. And if we don't respect all of our stakeholders and build that trust and respect, then we won't be able to deliver that. Excellence is all about doing the best we possibly can, looking at best practice, being empowered and prepared to make change. And integrity, table stakes again for what we do. So every day as a project manager, you're leading a team. It is how you make those values explicit in everything you do that makes for a successful program and project. Delivering that, demonstrating that, leading by example is important. And this leads me to the last point, work-life balance. As a leader, when we're expecting people to work harder, to be able to deliver things faster, it is important that we focus on work-life balance. It is important that we understand that we demonstrate that to our teams. So making sure you have a good work-life balance will help your team have a good work-life balance. And that's a critical thing and a critical leadership trait that you must exhibit, and it goes to values. Again, I wish you every success over the next 2 days. We have to change the way we think about managing projects and programs of work. We must continually think on a daily basis about the values that we exhibit to our teams and the way in which we build trust and respect. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you today.